Hello, this is David Morales, CEO and founding developer of VZ. We're on the rooftop of a hotel parking lot in sunny Orlando, but I'm not outside. I wanted to welcome our special guest, Sarah. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Well, our topic today is building, actually our purpose is building better pathways for student and supporters' success. And our topic is name tags. And it doesn't sound glorious, but there's been a revolution about it. And I want to get you out of the box of name tags and get you into the box of the future of where we're going to be talking about. But first, I think the audience would like to learn a little bit about who you are, how you fell into your position, and then I'll get into asking some questions.
Awesome. My name is Sarah Dodge. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the assistant directors at the University of Virginia for orientation and new student programs. In my current role, I work with our orientation leaders over the summer, as well as with parents and families as they're navigating our program. We do have a separate but concurrent parent program for summer orientation in July. I've been at the university for almost 7 years now, and have had a variety of interactions with parents over those years. Particularly, as we navigated COVID, we've kind of morphed our program in a lot of different ways, and continue to be curious about the ways that we can innovate around improving the student and the parent experience and the family's experience while they're connected with UVA.
Awesome. Well, let's have a little fun. I think the last time Sarah and I talked, I was in a field at my son's football game. Now I'm in a car. Not typical stuff. This is not my virtual background, which, everyone at the office laughed and said, maybe we need to make this a virtual background. You never know. One of the things that we tried to do, and what we're doing in season 2, is furthering and diving deeper into insights. And a lot of the things that we're doing is asking our clients why they use our product. So we kind of have like a VZ and Me channel, and we ask about different features. As simple or maybe as complex as they are, we're uncovering a lot. So name tags was one of them that have come up. And the reason why is in our old architecture for our product, we had something called an e-confirmation packet. Basically, it was a PDF that was dynamically built and could, share information. So it was just an alternate way to have like static data rather than dynamic data delivered. So as the years, have progressed and we've gotten better at check-in and how we handle students, name tags have always been nothing of a major concern because no one actually talked about the importance of name tags. And that's why we're here today. So my first question to you, just to get it going, why are name tags so important?
Oh my gosh, so we can call people by name. I think that that's a really underappreciated but super important way of welcoming people to our universities, is being able to address them by name upon first contact and not waiting to do the exchange of, I'm Sarah, who are you? And so for us, like this conversation around making name tags that were really visible and something that people wanted to have around their necks all day was something that was critically important. My boss always jokes that, if an event doesn't have name tags, we're not doing it right. But I think the reality of it is that it really is a helpful tool in sort of passively and actively making people feel welcome at your programs.
Well, okay, so now we've gotten to that. The old school way of doing it, which is still the same way people are doing it, is mail merge. They'll sit back at their office and have their Word templates, and I just left the campus. I won't say what it is. I'm going to joke them a little later. But we were having discussion like, oh, we're okay with this mail merge templates. And then when I started explaining a little more about what you're doing at UVA, they were like, I want that too. Mm-hmm. And it's not just one client, it's 2 clients, it's 3 clients. And when we were at NODAC, and that was in Baltimore, if people are listening, it's just a national convention for orientation directors. And while we were there, Sarah had the opportunity to speak to some of our clients and also other people who were not and discuss it. And it was such like wildfire that I was like, we're just going to record this, at least we can disseminate the basics of it. So I think kind of the important question I heard everyone always asking you is, why was there a need to leverage the VZO product? And remember, the audience listening are people who use our product or are about to use our product. Why would you want to leverage VZO to have name tags?
Yeah, I think for us, when we started to use VZO, we were really thinking about the ways in which this product could make our lives easier. And so there were a lot of things that you had that were sort of pre-existing that we didn't come up with that made our lives easier. And so as we started to use those tools and realize how much easier they made our lives, I started to think about, what are the other things that are cumbersome or burdensome or just honestly pains in the neck over the course of the summer that perhaps your technology could help us streamline. And the reality is that we spent a lot of time at the University of Virginia with our orientation leaders pulling spreadsheets and then mail merging spreadsheets and then correcting typos and then printing them all out, and the printer jammed 6 times as we were printing, and then somebody would drop the pile on the way to wherever we needed to bring it to, and they'd be all out of alphabetical order, and then the OLs would have to stuff them and put them in the little plastic inserts for the name tags. And so it really was something that we were spending a huge chunk of time on, and at every step of the process was not an enjoyable thing, not a fun thing, and really something that caused a lot of harm and kind of turmoil among our team. And I was trying to really identify a way that we could leverage the technology to streamline that process and take a little bit of burden off of folks so that they could focus on other things that realistically are more important about the program, like being present to their orientees and the parents and families that are on campus.
Cool. So I think the next question is somebody says, what's the reality check? So that kind of is, the story behind it to make it real. But what were some of the constraints? Obviously the real estate of a name tag is crucial. You only have so much size to be able to do that. What were the discussions like there of saying, okay, we only have our normal name tags. We'll go into the business process of checking in and why name tags are important while we're there. But for right now, talk about that real estate. What made you, first of all, explain how did you use the real estate?
Yeah. So for context at UVA, for every one student, they're allowed to bring 2 guests with them to orientation. And so we knew that maximum each student was going to have their own name tag and then 2 name tags relevant to their guests. And so we use 3" by 4, like the name tags that are about this big. And those name tags come in groups of 6 per page. And so we knew already that 3 of those name tags would be used for the student, guest number 1, and guest number 2, which left this sort of other half of the page to sort of use your language as real estate for, other information that we might want to disseminate to our students and their families. And so for us, we really used it as an opportunity to think about what were the questions that we were commonly being asked around check-in time in particular, and how might we help to answer those questions more proactively for families? And then how might we guide them to some resources that are like quick, I guess, for us. They're not things that are really deep dives, but instead they're sort of a simple answer to a maybe perceived complicated question. And so we used one of the blocks as sort of a your next steps process. I think we gave them 3 or 4 steps about what they were supposed to do after they checked in. I find that very often the question is, where do I go next? Who do I talk to? Where's such and so building? And so we tried to address that in the your next steps portion of the name tag. We also gave them some context around what things they should bring with them. We often have challenges around people forgetting to bring, their orientation folder with them or their laptop if that's relevant for their session. And so we said, don't forget and then kind of gave them a short list of the things that they needed to bring. Then we also talked about how to connect to the Wi-Fi and, in fact, gave them a QR code that they could just click on that would loop them into the university.
Let me tell you that. I've told that to other people, and that's hot. And it's
Yeah.
so smart. It's like, because all the resources you need, you can't really do, especially you walk from building to building, no connection, cell connection. Just get them on, the wireless. Sorry.
Yeah, and honestly, David, it served us twofold, right? Like, it got the guests onto the guest Wi-Fi, but for us, our students have to log into a different kind of Wi-Fi that they need to be on for course registration. And so the link, the QR code said, if you're a guest, do this process. If you're a student, do this process. And it really streamlined that, so we didn't have as much of a traffic jam when we got to course registration. And historically, students have not been connected to Wi-Fi yet, but now they had this resource to kind of help them get connected as soon as they arrived on campus. So that was great. And then the third thing that we did was we just gave them a coupon to the bookstore, which got them into the bookstore. They got a little bit of a discount on some of their UVA apparel for their families, and it really did sort of allow them to get excited in that way about coming back in the fall as well.
Well, I mean, design is one aspect of it, and the real estate is another. But part of that real estate also is a controversial topic that people are constantly addressing, and you know where I'm going with this one. Pronouns. And placement of names, length of names. Maybe, you know, different cultures have different ways of representing that. How did you address that there?
Yeah, I think we learned a lot. So I'll do the length of name piece first, because that was something that we learned along the way. Surprisingly, Stephanie was a very common name that didn't fit on the initial design of our name tags, and so we were actually able to work with you all to reprogram the name tag so that it was smart, right? Like if we uploaded a name that was too long in size, the program, I guess, would do it for us and make the font smaller so that that person's name fit and wasn't cut off by the printer when we went to print it here. We still follow a first name, last name format. I think that's something that we're chewing on as far as what you mentioned about different cultures representing their names in different ways. And I think that's how we're going to stick with it, but I also would be curious to hear from people who are watching, like if there are other solves for that, because it certainly is important to represent folks' names in the ways that they want to represent it. And with that in mind, we also have fields in our VZ or our registration for preferred name, as well as sort of the name that comes in through the student system to us. And so we did preferred names and then last names as listed on our name tags. As far as pronouns go, I think that's really something that people have to consider the context of their campus, right? And so for us, that was really important. We have many colleagues across the state of Virginia who have had awesome conversations about why it's important and inclusive to put pronouns on name tags. And so we wanted to stand alongside those folks and be among those who listed pronouns. Within the registration form, students and guests alike could select their pronouns. So we did, I think we had she, her, he, him, they, them, and then we also had an opportunity for folks to type in how they preferred to be called. I would say to you that 99.9% of people did that. No grievance. Of course, you always have the few who type something that's, offensive or clearly not a pronoun. And so part of our process was to sort of go through that list and just double check real quick to make sure the pronouns were not something that would be offensive once we printed. But again, in general, 99% of people were following directions and doing that as you would anticipate in an inclusive way. I think the one pushback, maybe, I don't know, feedback that we got from parents in particular was that if the student had done the registration solo, sometimes they were surprised to find that their pronouns were listed on their name tags. I don't know that I inherently think that's a problem, because, again, I think it's important to be inclusive and call people as they wish to be called. But it certainly was something that we did get a few comments on over the summer in terms of parents saying, well, how did you know my pronouns? And the reality is it's because their students put it in there for them. So, again, something to consider. I anticipate that we'll continue that practice. One thing that we are going to add for summer 2023 is a prefer not to share option. I think there are a variety of reasons why people prefer not to share, and so that strikes me also as an inclusive practice to give people the option to opt out on those pronouns, in which case it would just show up as a blank space on their name tag rather than the pronouns that they would use.
Well, rather than getting philosophical yet, this is not a trivial topic at all. There's a lot of spawning of conversation in different directions, but we have to go over the basics here. Yes, everyone can open up a Word document, some print pressing, or something like that, and say, I want to design and do this. This is not why we're talking about name tags. But one of the things we do have to get out of the way are the barriers, and the barriers are check-in, you had mentioned. What are you going to be doing when you have to print out something and it's not printed out correctly? So that's why I brought the e-confirmation packet up earlier, and we're trying to educate our clients. It's not as simple as opening up a document, hitting print, and 600 things come out. What happens when you have to add a guest on the fly? I mean, we do interviews in orientations. We constantly see students forgetting to add their parents or supporters, or someone can't come, or someone has a wrong name. Then you have to create it on the fly. So there are processes behind the scenes that enabled that. But when I sat down in your room, you guys seem awfully happy, giggling that you could just print one thing out and doing something. I mean, those efficiencies make a difference, don't they?
Yep, they really do. And I think the pieces of like the extra people and that sort of stuff is certainly, it comes down to like the capacity of what your check-in is, right? Like we're not able to bring printers over to where we do check-in at UVA. And so that means that in some cases, some people have handwritten name badges. And that is something that we are okay with. I think that other places may not be okay with that. And so again, it's sort of up to the culture and context of your campus. But one thing that we do to sort of try to catch that before it happens is that in our confirmation email that goes to students a week prior to their orientation session, we remind them one more time to register their guests. And so in many cases, we do see a bump in, the week before, students being like, oh no, I haven't registered my mom yet, and them going in and adding them, which just is something that we've sort of factored into the timeline of being able to print. And again, in many cases, that does catch some folks ahead of time so that we are able to print a name tag for them before the session begins.
Yeah, I always made this kind of joke. It's like when you go to conferences and you get the sticky name tag, you rip it off and you throw it in the trash can at the end of the conference, because I've done presentations. You go back, look at the trash can and see how many are there. But what struck me unique about your school is the concept of maybe, it's a metaphor, but maybe not, that people would want to get that name tag because it means something to them. We'll talk about the sense of belonging and creating that experience, which I think is really the philosophical approach behind this. But the physical approach is you're going to create for a scrapbook or something in the future, something that you wouldn't want to quite toss away because it's the beginning of a journey. It's the beginning of something beyond, like it's that step beyond graduation of high school or wherever your transition's from.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I won't dig into the scrapbook thing, but maybe we'll talk about that a little later because that sense of belonging means a lot. So while I've been visiting campuses, and one of the campuses I was at today is University of Central Florida, and we were all talking about that first layer of physical engagement, and at your campus and having that. How crucial did you see creating those name badges and seeing people put it on? Because I've gone to conferences before and you see the little ribbons at the bottom. Can you give like a verbal description and a visual of what your name tags look like? So how do you hand it to them? And because I'm going to tell you why that flows into the philosophical thing.
Yeah. So the idea for sort of the general design of our name tag actually came from attending national conferences. And not everybody does this, but a couple of the larger conferences that I've been to actually design their name tags such that you get a whole sheet of paper. And so I just thought that was really cool as a conference attendee. I got a lot of information that I otherwise would have had to find in a variety of places. And so that's sort of where that came from for us. But the trick is, right, when you're at a conference, most of the time you're just checking yourself in. When you're at orientation at the University of Virginia, you're checking yourself in, and you're checking your family members in or your guests in. And so we've got to make sure everybody gets a name tag around their neck, even though the student is the person who comes up to the table. And so that was a change in our process. That was usually we've had parent check-in tables, student check-in tables. And so again, as we were sort of learning this summer, we had to figure out the new way of making sure that people got name tags around their necks. And so when we did check in, we were trying to do everybody at the table. That was just too many people. But we ended up inviting the students up and having them sort of identify their guests for us and being like, hey, you're going to get this piece of paper and everybody needs to put this around their neck. We have the benefit of having OLs around who can sort of guide parents to the name tags just in case they're not wanting to get into their student's hair. So there's a lot of sort of team effort in terms of making sure that before they walk out of that check-in space, they've got a name tag around their neck. It's relevant to us because they need that to get into the dining halls to eat during orientation. And so also emphasizing sort of the practicality of having a name tag around your neck does seem to help us a little bit. We use like lanyards, like strings that go around your neck, rather than sticky ones or pins, because we found people would lose the sticky ones, they'd fall off in the middle of the summer when it's a million degrees in Virginia, or people didn't want to put pins into their clothes and make holes there. So we found the around your neck option to be the best one, and actually we're pretty successful with people stuffing their own name tags this summer, and we weren't sure how that was going to go. But again, I mentioned this earlier, it provided a huge efficiency for us. Our OLs were no longer stuffing 10,000 name tags over the course of the summer, and instead, people were doing that sort of as a part of the check-in process. So it was just a matter of the perforated sheets being folded and ripped in such a way that they were distributed, and then sending people on their way. So perhaps that's an oversimplification, but in general, I would say it was much more of a win than it was kind of cumbersome for our team.
Okay, so now that we've addressed the physical, so people get a mental thing, I want to get a little deeper into a couple things. How effective do you believe that the bookstore coupon was?
Oh, huge. I mean, the number of people who were like, can I have two, it was almost comical to us. And so we have always done some type of coupon, voucher, something to our bookstore as a part of our larger orientation folder. And the challenge for us was that the coupon was usually about this big, and in a folder full of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper or packets of things, it was very often lost. And so people didn't find the coupon, it would fall out, it would get jammed into the sleeve of the folder. In a way that just, they'd probably be on the drive home or something and then find the coupon and, oh shoot, I missed my opportunity. And so this really elevated the visibility of that. And, I don't have numbers from our bookstore specifically, but I do know that there was far more conversation about the coupon and wanting to use the coupon and when will I have time to go to the bookstore, which certainly was different than previous in-person experiences where, again, maybe they found it, maybe they didn't, but this time it didn't get lost amongst all of the other pieces of paper that come with orientation.
So there's a bit of a leading question into the little area I want to get into. So you said the dining hall is crucial for that. Were they checking in at the dining hall? Like, were there like QR codes they scanned the people in? And how was that?
So it's not a scan. Yeah, we're old school at UVA, so we actually had one of those, counters that clicks one at a time, kind of like a skip it kind of sort of thing. But we have folks at the dining hall who are literally counting head by head, but their instruction is look at the name tag, make sure that it's an orientation name tag, and then click the people in. So we didn't do a scan with this. I definitely think, again, with the QR code for the other portion of our name tags, that's certainly something, that a different university might opt into depending on their process. But we had just clicked people in manually.
Yeah, because one of the things that we're trying to address is making the check-in process efficient for the administrators, but also beginning that first, I would say, major interaction. And you used a word called OL, and I love that topic. I could talk forever about that, and we've done a couple of podcasts on that. But one of the things I've learned from other universities is that once you kind of funnel everyone into the check-in process, then they kind of get pushed to a different area, whether you separate students and supporters in doing that. Is there an indicator on your name badge, or do you have future positioning of that real estate to where you can figure out what groups they belong to so they can begin developing that smaller sense of belonging with an OL?
Yeah, so a couple of different things that we use. So we have different color kind of bottom sections of our name tags for guests and students. So UVA's colors are orange and blue. Students get blue on the bottom of their name tag. Guests get orange. And so real quick, we can identify whether a person is a student or a guest. I found this particularly helpful with non-traditionally aged students. It's not, every student coming to UVA is not 18 years old. And so it's really important for us to sort of address people appropriately and make sure that they're in the right place. I know prior to doing this, we'd have times where we'd look at somebody and perhaps judge them to be a little bit older than 18 and assume that they were to go with the parents group. And now we have this differentiation of, okay, I know you have blue, I know you're a student. So even though you may look 45, you should still be with the student group, and we don't need to question that because we know our name tag system is designed in a way that includes you as a student, regardless of how old you are or how old you appear to be. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then the other piece for us is on the student name tags, we've actually set it up so that it programs their orientation leader onto it. So literally at our welcome address, we say to the students, all right, everyone look at your name tag. The name on there that's not your own is the name of your orientation leader. And then we give them instructions about how to find them, as we dismiss them from the welcome address. And so that has also been really helpful because it doesn't rely on the student remembering, oh, my OL's name is David, I got to find David, and then they inevitably forget who David is. And, now we can just say, look at your name tag real quick, who is it? And it allows them to connect in that way without having to remember an additional piece of information.
Yeah, I mean, you said a whole bunch of things. I'm going to stick to the OL and go back to non-traditional in a second. I like what you're doing there, and I'm trying to see kind of that crystal ball aspect of if people understand OLs are kind of the face, the make it or break it person, and generally it is, from what I've learned, the first major contact, an in-depth conversation being accepted into the university. That name is also very important. So it's not just the name tag of the individual, it's the name of that person who's the frontline person bringing them in. And I more often than not, I've heard sometimes a parent will call back. It's like, oh, we had a great OL, or they just, and they want to talk to that person again. And that goes into theory that we talked about, that eventually building mentors out of these OLs and developing that relationship is that this connection becomes a customer service facing aspect. And that's where I'm driving with the name tag of the philosophical area, is expanding that real estate really to address customer service models at universities of what is important. Because you can't tackle everything in that small little box. You got to be able to give instant resources, out. But I am going to take a different path real quick and go back to non-traditional. That last video podcast that we did with Dennis Weiss also is a huge discussion with the book Great Upheaval, that they gave a percentage of 64%, but whatever it is, your schools have to go back and reinvent that person coming in for orientation. It's not the same anymore, and you said it. Is that what number at UVA, or how do you see that? Is it larger than 50%, or what number are you looking at of non-traditional students?
It's not nearly 50% at UVA at this stage of the game. I think the large majority of our students still fall into that traditionally aged 18 to 22 window. I think we see it most in our transfer student population with our non-traditional students, and particularly folks that are coming back from the military. And I think in that last episode, you talked about parents or folks that are maybe transferring from a community college where they've taken a while to get those first 2 years of credits done, and now they're coming to UVA. And so usually it's with our transfer population. Obviously there are always exceptions to that, but I think most of our non-traditionally aged students at UVA are transfer students from a different institution first.
Okay, so I know you're wearing multiple hats over there. You're an ambassador for UVA. I get that. And so there's a couple sets of questions you can answer globally, which you did very smart earlier, saying some of the universities may do it differently. And I think a lot of people listening want to take your insight from UVA, but also maybe take it from a globalized. And this is where, I keep joking that you're going to be the president of the United States one day. And then, they got to hear your opinion on this such. So where I'm leaning on one aspect that confuses me, because you can't service every particular need, is that you have the check-in, which is kind of like a choke point, right? You have everyone coming in, checking in. But what we've learned from a lot of people, they care a lot now about checkout concept of, did the person actually really go through all of orientation? Or did they just check in and peace, I'm out and my parents just stayed there and I'm going to go hang out, with my brother or friends or anything like that. Have you guys explored seeing how far they go through orientation by doing any type of, multi-step check-ins?
Yeah, so not through a portal of any sort, but for us, the way that we've structured our program is that students are required to be with their OL for the entire first day. Our program is 2 days long, and so the way that it works is that they check in, they go to a welcome address, and that's kind of as the whole mob, so to speak. But then after that welcome address, they break out into their small group, and they really do spend the rest of the day with that orientation leader in a group usually no larger than 20 students. And so I think there's something to be said for small groups. I feel a responsibility to stay here. I feel like my OL is going to notice if I leave. And also, somebody cares about me. And so I feel incentivized to stay because somebody knows my name. You know what I mean? And so I think for us, that has been really key, is designing the program so that every stage of the day there is an orientation leader that's checking in, that's leading the group, that's kind of alternating between a presentation to an activity to a facilitated dialogue, and keeping students engaged in that way. We don't really believe much in sitting 900 students in an auditorium and having them lectured at all day. I think our program is really experiential in nature. We really want students to see different places and spaces, get in front of a lot of different university administrators. And so the design overall is such that they see that name on their name tag in the morning, and then, stay with that person through the rest of the day. And then as far as the second day is concerned, everything that they do really hinges on their course registration. And so obviously, if you don't register for your classes, you can't be a college student. And so for us, we know that students stay because course registration is the last thing that they do. And so, we haven't done any sort of formal check through a system throughout the day, but we do know that students are staying and they're registering for classes. And so that's how we know at UVA that students stay, for the entirety of that orientation experience in July.
Well, this is kind of where we spill into this fantasy land and, outside of the University of Virginia. And a long time ago, I worked with a couple of universities using technology called geolocation. I think people are very familiar with it. But geolocation still requires every person to have a device, and which cell tower they pop to, and whether they enable, location services and all of that. But the concept was content delivery, meaning that as someone traversed from wherever check-in they were, let's say they went to the library, they went to, as you say, an educational session or where you have a seminar, or they go to register for course registration, they were trying to deliver like the next steps. This is what you need to be doing now that you're here. Well, that wasn't a reality check. It actually backfired. Because it really turned out that, tracking was a bad thing. But what we learned is that if you printed out like a QR code or an ID or something like that, if you scanned to whatever place that you went, you could receive a text message that would say, hey, you just checked in, thank you, you need to meet here. Oh, now that you're here, perhaps you want to learn a little more. Oh, now it's the second day, welcome back, how was your first day, fill out the survey. Really trying to do that. So that kind of crystal ball thing, do you think that, how do you feel about that, of personalizing and customizing that content delivery based on where they are during their orientation experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you bring that up. One of the things that we've talked about at UVA is potentially using something like that for directions. I think one area that is challenging for us is that because our campus is so spread out, it's often hard for us to have staff everywhere we need someone in order to give people adequate directions to get from point A to point B, because we only have so many orientation leaders, we only have so many student affairs staff, realistically we only have so many university bus drivers, right? Like, there are only so many people that we can position somewhere throughout the day, and heaven forbid somebody gets lost and ends up totally off the map of where orientation things are happening. I think there's a reality to wanting to be able to provide more immediate and accurate support to people who are lost. And so one of the things we've talked about is there a way to set up signage that has QR codes attached to it that give people Google Maps directions, or give people a link to the schedule that then allows them to click and say, well, the welcome address is going on. For directions to the welcome address, click here. And just linking them up in that way. I think for the most part, people are bringing their devices to orientation. Again, obviously there are exceptions to the rules, and we want to consider that as well. But I think for the most part, people are savvy in a way with QR codes that would be a helpful resource. Another thing, and I'm not sure, this seems to have just popped up at UVA recently, but it seems like it's going to be a thing going forward, is people have started putting adhesive stickers on the ground. And for us, it's been as detours around construction. But we were even talking about, for orientation this summer, maybe we're going to get those stickers instead of worrying about putting signs and arrows and things out and then having to then worry about those getting stolen or ruined by the weather or what have you. And so those stickers, I have to figure out what they're called. I mean, they literally are stickers that people are slapping onto the sidewalk, but they're weatherproof. And again, something that we could throw a QR code on to make it easy for people to track where they are and where they should be going. So things to consider. I mean, on the other hand, we love an old school chalking experience at UVA. A lot of our signage and direction over the summer is literally the orientation leaders going out before the session and writing this way to auditorium or whatever on the ground, on the sidewalk. And we get some great feedback about that too. So I think it's that balance of maintaining that humanity and the fun that chalking brings while also integrating the technology that can be really helpful for students and families.
I mean, I just thought it off the top of my head because I'm in Orlando here at UCF, and my daughter's doing a cheerleading competition. Shout out to her. And one of the things that'd be kind of cool is if you could geolocate your OL if you're lost, and have the reverse type of location. You're like, oh my God, I went to the bathroom. I went to the bookstore, right? Like, I want to get this shirt, I want to do something. And like, where the heck am I supposed to be, or where is my OL? This is, I told you, like Fantasyland, but I see that happening more and more, where some people want that autonomy. Like, me as being a parent, that if my children went, I'd probably meander and go, all around, take pictures, and be like, oh my God, it's an hour later. Where do I need to be? And just kind of locate as you can, as find my location. So if your OL or whatever had shared locations, you just shared immediately, then you could figure out, where you need to be going. But I'm just throwing out there, anyone listening or whatever. I mean, I know we're trying to avoid tracking as much as possible, but it's inevitable, how we want to do that. But with that content delivery and different items, you talked another thing about course registration and advising. And this is not the topic of name tags right now.
Right.
This is an important question that I am focusing on this season during our podcast, is tackling pre-advising before the student begins course registration. How do you see that, or how is that working at UVA, and perhaps how do you see that changing on how to get better at pre-advising, so when they do come to that second day of orientation, it's a little more efficient and a little more, who's really coming in to the university?
Yeah. So I think, honestly, for us, the pandemic really moved the needle in terms of advancing our ability to do that well. That probably was not the case everywhere, but I think in many ways the practice at UVA was a little bit more old school, and now we're sort of catching up with things that other universities are sort of doing ahead of time. And so the first thing that I'll mention is advising at UVA looks very different depending on what school a student is coming into. We only bring in 75 new students to the School of Nursing every year, so obviously that enrollment process feels much more personalized than the 2,700 College of Arts and Sciences students that we bring in. And so, not to say that there's a disparity, but it's just a very different process and experience. And so I think that's one thing that I always feel and hear from students is that, if I'm coming from Northern Virginia and I'm a nurse and my friend is in the College of Arts and Sciences, they're very often kind of head-to-head comparing what their courses look like. But the reality is, a nurse has a very sort of prescriptive first semester curriculum. A College of Arts and Sciences student can really take anything and they'll be on track to graduate on time. And so that's one of the things that we are helping the schools to clarify a little bit, is just these are different processes and your experience is going to be different than somebody that's in another school, and that's okay, and you're not at a deficit, and they may get an email that's different than yours ahead of time, and that's okay. So that's sort of the first part, is just demystifying the differences between the pre-advising process. The other piece that we realized is that in instances where students have to take a particular class in their fall semester, in many ways we could just go ahead and pre-enroll them, right? Like, they may have a preference about time or want to switch, their discussion section that happens or whatever. But the reality is if everybody needs to take the first writing requirement, we can just go ahead and pre-enroll them and then allow them to switch sections when they get here, rather than forcing them to, also select that class. That really can be a limiting factor as they're designing the other things. And so I think that's one thing that I'm really I'm happy about, right? Like, that's something that the pandemic moved the needle on, that we're able to do that now. And so as we approach 2023. I still have to keep track of what year is coming up next. But as we approach 2023, I think really what we are focusing on is helping students to complete those unique pre-enrollment tasks
Correct.
before orientation. So we created the process last year, and now we're thinking about, and this comes back to VZO, but how do we use the customized task lists to then help students do all of the things and follow up with them to make sure those tasks are completed. Because I think in general, again, most people do the steps, but for those people who don't, it's not in many cases because they don't want to. In many cases, it's because they don't have the capital around coming into college to know to even look for that step, right? Like a lot of our first generation college students don't know that there's a placement exam for calculus, or that there's a certain deadline by which they need to submit their AP scores. And so that's one of the benefits of that task list and the customized nature of it, is that we can really go in and not only display that to them, but also follow up to say, hey, you haven't done this yet. Know that the deadline's coming up, and it helps refine our process and support students in a way that we just weren't doing prior to having that as an option.
Well, good news. I mean, you're ahead of the curve in this discussion, but I'm bringing all of our clients together on this one. This is going to be a big discussion probably in February of how everyone's going to be addressing pre-advising, because there are a couple things that I've learned, and please correct me if I'm wrong. That's why I'm speaking to you to learn. I'm just a podcast host, a CEO of a tech company, and you guys are doing the hard work. What I've noticed is that the benefit of pre-advising serves a couple things. One that you talked about, right? It's just getting people educated who wouldn't know what they need to be doing, not left behind type of thing. Also, it's helping the advisors to serve those people that if they knew a little bit, like, at CNU, Christopher Newport University, UConn, other schools, like a first semester planning sheet. Maybe they have a different structure for advising, like learning communities or something different. Course ranking, course preferences. So we're looking to build out our pre-advising to give tools that not only benefit the student that you talked about, but staff members and advisors and what they could be doing to help him. Because, as I learned, I thought all advising was done through the registrar. That's not the case. Admissions does. It's all over the place now that, we're getting bigger. So my question to you is, I'm looking at my notes here because this is a term I have not heard before, persistence rate. And where orientation falls into that, and that's a question I want to go into, or topic or subtopic, is what I learned it means is that the orientation program, the onboarding, cannot predict the 4 years of persistence. Even though they're leaning heavily on you guys to say, get the sense of belonging, do all of this, you do all this hard work, that you can't really categorize that persistence rate because you're dealing with a short window of time, but that literally that task list that we're talking about extends that period of time even into admissions. At University of South Florida, we do their online app, so we get it now 18 months. You can imagine a full path of determining a behavioral trait. And then you're talking about post-orientation, getting in the family weekend, where now you're talking 3 months beyond they're coming to orientation or whatever, get the supporter type of persistence and developing that with alumni. I'm going to ask you, what do you think persistence rate means? Is that a discussion? Is that something that comes up in your orientation professional world?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I think we're very fortunate at the University of Virginia that persistence isn't top of mind. I think we have very strong persistence at UVA. But I think a lot about, there's a difference between getting the degree, right, and just having the University of Virginia piece of paper to hang on your wall, and also walking away from this place with a positive experience, right, or an experience that was fulfilling and meaningful to you. And so, again, we're very, very privileged at UVA to be able to think about persistence in that way, right, of like most of our students are coming in and graduating in that 4 to 6 year window of time, and good. I hope that for every university out there. And that then gives us this benefit of thinking about how do we create and curate experiences for students that are beneficial to them, because of the identities that they hold, because of the things that they are or are not bringing with them to college, because of the network of mentors that they get while they're here or they find while they're here, because of the friendships and the communities that they build. And so persistence, yes, always important. If you don't have that, then you don't have colleges anymore, as far as I'm concerned. But I think for us, it's about persistence with that network afterwards, and that taking your University of Virginia experience and whatever that means for you, speaking about it in a way that shows that you've learned something, that you've grown, and that you have an affection for whatever your experience was. Because again, like, just because everybody has the UVA degree doesn't mean they had the same experience while they were here.
Correct. And, we're a technology company, you know that. And we always try to solve problems with technology, but going down to UTRGV, Texas, Rio Grande Valley, other schools where technology doesn't really exist as much as we think it is. We read the media and such, but I've gone to schools where they're actually sharing a computer with their whole class, high school class, or they're in areas that are just not utilized for technology. So we're talking about all these cool little check-in things, QR code things, and everything. But that simple name badge, and I'm bringing it back, is I've learned that these different schools play a bigger part of disseminating information to people who would not have gotten it via email or text. And I want to be specific where I'm going, but I give you a free platform to talk about that concept too, is we're pushing the supporter platform. It's big, it's hot, it's a great technology for people who use technology. So you get someone at UTRGV, when I was down there, I was telling them about the idea. She's like, David, look at the border crossing over there. These families get in the cars, come across. They're not using phones, David. They're not going to log into a supporter platform portal, check their phone, they're taskless, doing that. You're servicing a certain group of people where if they use technology, it is very hot, very powerful, to the point. And what I'm driving at is, you talked about the student badge and the supporter badge. And I'm going to lean on the supporter for a bit. We've talked about the students. I think that guest name tag is underutilized. I think you could put more things on there. You're talking about the student, the dining and this, and the bookstore also for the parents, obviously. But like in your crystal ball, like what do you think supporters would want? I mean, what would be something you would want to put on there in the future, like that could help get information out to them for those who are not communicating with their students, and those who are not being a helicopter parent by signing into their technology, they're technology less.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. So I actually, as I was prepping for this, I printed out a version of our name tags just so I could have it in front of me in case you started talking about something that I forgot about. And I'm thinking about all of the sort of people that this gives you access to as a supporter, as a student, what have you. And so we talked about the OL being on the student name tag. We list the phone number and the email address for the orientation office so they could reach out to us there. We've got some information about connecting with IT support if you struggle with the Wi-Fi. Obviously, this gives you the bookstore location. You could go talk to those people. But really, the two name tags on this whole sheet that don't give you access to an additional human are those guest name tags, those supporter name tags. So now you've got me thinking, because I'm like, all right, who is, like, if I can list one resource, like, what would that be? In consideration of not wanting to overburden that office by throwing, 8,000 parents at them after giving them a name tag, right? So that's something to consider too, is like you want to be a good partner when you're putting somebody's contact information on a name tag. But one of the things that I love about like our faculty staff IDs at UVA is on the back there's like connection information for support, right? And so if you need to talk to a counselor, if you need to talk to the Dean of Students office, all of that kind of stuff, like that information is right here. And so students can look at the back of their ID, which they carry with them all the time, and see that. And so I'm sort of wondering if that's the direction to go with parents, right? Like, do we give them the phone number to the Dean on Call number? Like, that's something that we want parents to know about, which is top of mind for me right now because I'm also on call right now. But I think it's like, is it the Dean of Students office number? Is it, student health? I don't think we want to send them to a particular individual, but there are probably numbers at the university, the parents program. I don't know. There are a lot of places where we could send them as a primary resource from that name tag. So there's probably something to that. I'm going to need to chew on that a little bit, but I do think a connection point would be a really interesting next step. And again, when you go home and you throw your name tag in a pile, and then a few weeks later you're cleaning out your pile and you come across it, by that time your student may be at school, they may be struggling a little bit, and you may need to make an outreach to whatever that office is. So I think that's a really interesting idea, and I'm going to bring that to our team meeting after this.
Well, see, that's the benefit of me talking to everybody. I don't think of anything. I just bring them all together. But back to personalization, back to that last video podcast about non-traditional. They're not parents. It could be life partners, spouses, friends. Those people need to have different badges also. It's not just geared to like what that a parent is. But I'm going to tell you something. We're doing a podcast next week with Nicole from NCAT and Betsy from Binghamton, your colleagues per se as orientation professionals. They have been tasked this year, and some of them a little beforehand, of Family Weekend because it's an event management piece. It's right after that. And we realized that personalized task list or customized task list that we've created, the post-engagement for supporters was lacking. And so when we used the VZO platform to build Family Weekend for event management, what we understood is that, I've said this before, but I'm just reiterating because no one needs to listen to all the old podcasts. I bring back these facts. So you can fact check me back then. I'm probably wrong, but I'm right now, whatever type of thing. That a large portion of the supporters that are coming to your orientation sessions that get that name badge, if you simply on the back of it or somewhere said, hey, pre-register for Family Weekend. I'm just saying that different schools could use that, not just you. But what it does, it gives that next step of, well, I'm done with orientation. Like, I'm driving in the car, I'm reminiscing my 2 hours talking, and flipping it around and be like, hey, baby, whatever. Like, I want to go to Family Weekend. I want to see Sally. I want to see Jimmy. I want to bring the dog. I want to see a football game, lacrosse, whatever. I think that's a misunderstood concept of where post-engagement is, and back to the name tags and that real estate. I just want to get your reflection on the supporter side first, and then we'll come back to the student, then we'll come back to the name tag. But from the supporter side, what type of things are you doing at those orientation sessions that you think you could market better to the supporters, and without an email and without a text?
Yeah. So a couple of things. So my favorite thing, and actually something that we've gotten really awesome feedback from our parents and our supporters at orientation, particularly at our July 2-day program, is we have a section of our day that's called Ideas Worth Sharing. And Ideas Worth Sharing is it's set up conference style. And so there are 3 sessions that are going on simultaneously. And they're about big ideas, but they're big ideas that help you to be a better parent, partner, supporter to your college student. And so we've gone through a lot of different sort of iterations of what those presentations are, but we've done things like how to raise a resilient college student. We've done things about understanding the young adult brain. We've done things about sort of holistic wellness and thriving at the university. We've got a faculty member here who does a talk about like study skills and why we're bad at studying, right? And so they're much more conceptual in nature than they are facts, right? We certainly have a housing session and a financial aid session and, those nuts and bolts that people always want from an orientation experience. But this has been a portion of the day where people consistently give us feedback like, oh, I didn't even think about this part of being a parent to a college student, or I didn't even think about, having this type of conversation with my student during their first semester at school. And so it sort of prompts a deeper level of thinking, I think. Like it's good that you know where the registrar's office is or how to get a strep test at student health, but it's more important that we're giving people or we're equipping people with some conversation topics around, when your student gets their first bad grade, or when your student has a roommate conflict, or when your student might need to seek mental health support for the first time. Like, it really gives a big picture view of some really common challenges that we know students experience at UVA, and so it allows us to foreshadow those things in a way that's not scary, but it sort of normalizes, this is something that may very well come across your path as a parent to a student at UVA, and so, get thinking about it, and there's nothing wrong with it, and you're not alone in this experience, and, here's how we as a community, A, talk about it, but then B, support each other and support your student and support you, to be honest, in many cases, through that experience, while also making sure to come back to persistence, your student persists and they graduate and they have a positive time at UVA overall. And so that actually, it's called Ideas Worth Sharing.
I like
conference
that.
style sessions about big topics. And that feels to me like something that's, it was an easy fix, honestly, when we added it to our schedule. But I don't think we anticipated how excellent it would become and how important that would be for parents and families.
You know what we learned from UConn? I keep bringing them up because they were the early adopter for the supporter. Originally it was Portal, but now Platform because they've extended it. Uh, that when we were interviewing the parents at parent orientation, there was an event going on, like a class. Like, oh, I've seen the online video of this, but it was different when parents were asking questions now. Not what they saw virtually through a video in pre-orientation. In the post orientation, there were people asking questions, which we were kind of talking about, where people were giving advice that you wouldn't get online. And then we were interviewing this one mom, and she's like, "Oh, my husband couldn't make it," and he's like on the phone with me, like, "What am I missing?" All of that. It's the what am I missing? Because some of these supporters can't come it. So imagine that you have that session that you're talking about, you record it, and it's different every single time. And then if you leverage the technology, I know we're going back to technology now, but a large portion of our clients use that technology for a reason, that you invite the supporter back in post-orientation, say, hey, that one thing you attended or someone else couldn't? We recorded that for you. And when you're talking about suicide prevention, money matters. Things that are big topics where this eyes glazed over because they're busy with their work and their life and graduation, and all of a sudden it becomes, this is the topic, how do I get to it? Content delivery, which I told you about, is like what we're looking at that post-engagement. Well, thank you for opening up about that. That was something I'm going to take down and bring to other people. As we're rounding that corner, I want to always bring it back a little bit to name tags and why we're doing here, but I don't want to make this define you. I can tell you personally, the people I've talked to have enjoyed speaking to you and kind of your wisdom, and there's something special about your insight. The thing that I want to tackle with the name tags is my final thing, and then we'll get to the one thing at the end. But my final thing is, you kind of in the beginning talked about this is what I would do differently. You kind of flirted with the ideas. Everything that's occurred, how do you see the name tag experience changing now that we've talked? And that lens, and maybe giving advice for people, not just for next year, but maybe build a plan for 2-3 years that if you just did a little research, did a little analytics, what are things that you would suggest, or even for yourself you're thinking about doing that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, I think one of the things for us, and we did touch on this a little bit earlier, is like, how do we get everybody's name tags to sort of do what we need them to do for them, right? So I would love to get away from handwritten name tags writ large, right? Like that, that to me, it just feels different, right? When Sarah is handwritten on my name tag and David is printed on yours, that I feel different, even if that's not the intention, when we're standing next to each other at whatever the event is. So that's one thing. I have been looking at different printers and portable things. If anybody has any suggestions out there in the VZ universe, they are welcome. But that is like a realistic obstacle for us right now at UVA, is just the lack of printers on site. I think the other piece for us is still thinking critically about that real estate. Like, I like what we do right now. I think there's potential to do better, do more, be more specific. One thing that came up that we just sort of missed last year was that the way that our transfer session operates is different than the way that our first year sessions operate. And so the real estate for transfer students for us probably needs to look different on our name tags. And so that was a design flaw in 2022 that we'll fix for 2023, so that it more accurately speaks to that population of students and the technicalities of that session. And then the last thing is, right, I think the one, again, practicality, reality, is that printing a full page like this did increase our costs. So, we used to print 6 different name tags here, and now we have this whole side that used to be name tags. So it kind of, increased the cost of what we were printing. And so I'm sort of wondering, and this will make us use more ink, but do we do something with the back? Like right now, that's just blank. But the lanyards that they wear are double-sided. And so is there something to be said for that? I don't know. Are there more QR codes? Are there more, I don't even know what it is, scan into the dining hall. We talked about that. But there are probably other opportunities that we could use to sort of minimize the loose paper that we're giving out and synthesize some of that onto a name tag, which, again, for us, a student or a guest is going to have around their neck for the entirety of the orientation experience.
Thank you. Not closing the book, but closing the chapter on name tags. And I know this has been drawn out for a while, and I'm happy to close that chapter for right now. But what are some things, maybe briefly over just 45 seconds, 2 minutes, what are some new challenges you're looking at that have come up recently that you can share? What are things, for example, people are talking about the recession coming up and how people are battling against that, how to do internships and scholarships through the school in the sense of people working. What barriers or challenges are you facing right now coming into 23?
Yeah, I think the question that I'm really noodling on right now is thinking about what does it mean to be a residential campus, right? The University of Virginia is intended or designed as it currently stands for students to come and live in Charlottesville for 4 years and do their experience here in person, right? And holding that with the technology that exists in the world and knowing, that Zoom does exist. We can do a lot of things through modules and holding space on the internet, but also there's something different about being in a room physically proximate to your peers, to your student leaders, to your administrators, and getting meaningful experience in that way. So kind of this marriage between in-person and online feels significant. We want to do that because it's obviously in many ways more accessible for people not to have to travel back and forth to Charlottesville multiple times over the course of the summer for orientation and then to come back for move-in. And so what are ways that we can continue to put resources out there, to put content out there, to make sure that our in-person experience is especially meaningful and not just something that students can get by checking out a website or clicking on a video somewhere along the way. And so that, again, that piece of that identity development as a student feels really significant to do in person. And also, we do need to leverage some of these technologies to make sure that access and that cultural capital that we talked about earlier is something that students can continue to build really from the time they start looking at UVA as an option all the way through until graduation. And so that piece is something that I think higher ed across the board is just going to really need to continue to test out, evaluate, reevaluate, and be okay with letting go of some things that we've done for a while just because we like it, and really looking at some of the data to inform our practice moving forward so that, we're remaining in the best shape to serve the students who are coming to our institutions.
Well, I'm going to go back and take a couple of those and address that to the next, people that we're doing interviews with. Even though it's a tagline of what we're doing, what's the one takeaway that someone can take away from this? But it's really your voice. It's not the topic. It's not anything other than Sarah, your years of experience of where brought you here today. I would like you to share a little bit or tell people what's one thing that they can take away, not just from this conversation, but from you. And then I'd like to end it that way. So, Sarah, thank you very much as usual. I guarantee we will not talk about, which I just didn't say, again, and talk about other things. Thank you very much.
So I think one thing that I hope that people take away from this conversation, but also like looking at OTR as a field in general, is that there's a lot that we can do to innovate right now. And I think in a world where we sort of revisit the same academic cycle every year, it's very easy to sort of lather, rinse, repeat with your process. And it's very easy to take your program that you did in 2022 and move it into 2023, make a couple tweaks, shine it up a little bit, and move on to the next thing. And that does work, right? Like most places, I think, are doing that. And there's nothing wrong with it. But I also think that like taking a breath to say, hey, what are the things that are burdensome for me as a staff member right now? What are the things that my orientation leaders most consistently complain about or really love on the other end of the spectrum? What are those things that, we always hear from parents a little bit more about? and leaning into some of that, and not in a way that we're like tweaking. I think we're really good at tweaking in student affairs, but rather like reinventing. I want people to get excited about like remixing that new student experience and imagining it in like a what could be sort of way, rather than limiting ourselves to this is what it is right now and we'll take it a tip up for next summer. And so yeah, and I know that's a big ask, right? Like we're all super busy. But sometimes when you take a minute to be like, man, name tags really take a lot of my time. How can I fix this? The long run of that is that you save yourself hours in the summer fighting with your printer and, you know, running to the store to get additional name tags because you misprinted 100 name tags for that session. And so that's what I think the long-term benefit of taking a brief pause to innovate really is something that we could do better in student affairs. And I hope that for people, and I hope that, you know, in some way folks are able to carve out that time to do that, whatever that means to them, because name tags are not a problem everywhere, but I'm sure everywhere has a problem, if that makes sense.